Why did you write this book, and what is important about it?
Well, it's interesting. My publisher at the moment is the New Press in New York, and I wrote an article for the Australian, actually, which is Rupert Murdoch's national paper in Australia, about nuclear power, and I had various points in each paragraph, and she wrote to me, my editor, and said, "Okay, here's your next book. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5," and she said, "Can you do it in 6 weeks?" And I was just crazy, and I said yes. I did it in 2 months, and it was because of her instigation that I wrote it.
What is it that you have against the nuclear power industry?
Oh my God, I'm a physician. It's a sort of a silly question in a way, because nuclear power, even if there are no meltdowns, will induce epidemics of cancer, leukemia, genetic disease, and congenital malformations in all future generations for the rest of time. Apart from that, it's a super source of energy. Nuclear power produces radioactive waste, and its byproduct is electricity, which only happens for about 40 years before the thing is shut down. It is a horrendous method of generating electricity, absolutely horrendous. Beyond and apart from that, fairly important studies have been released from Germany and from France to show that children under the age of 5 living near a nuclear reactor have more than double the incidence of leukemia and a high incidence of solid cancers, because children are extremely radiosensitive, about 10 to 20 times more so than adults, because their cells are actively dividing. And little girls are much more sensitive, interestingly, than little boys. So it's dangerous to live near a reactor because they consistently emit radioactive materials into the air, into the water, and they're called routine emissions. Like, don't worry about it. We have to routinely emit radioactive poisons. If you live near, well, just too bad. Then we can have a meltdown, and you're in specific danger because you're 35 miles from 2 very old reactors at Indian Point, just up the Hudson. And indeed, the terrorists who flew into the World Trade Towers had targeted those 2 reactors, but they decided not to go into them because they thought they were protected by missiles, which indeed they're not. If they had penetrated those reactors, Manhattan would be non-existent. They would have destroyed the financial capital of the world. And if one of the reactors does melt down by accident, by design, by all, natural disasters, then, there'll be hundreds of thousands of people dying of acute radiation illness with their hair falling out, vomiting and bleeding to death. And then there will be probably nearly 1 million people dying of cancer. And you can imagine the chaos if Indian Point did melt down and the wind was blowing towards the city. The Lincoln Tunnel blocked, the bridges all blocked, absolute chaos and pandemonium. That's the scenario that could happen. So it's imperative that those 2 reactors be closed down. And don't forget, laws are not written in stone. Laws are written by mere mortals that can be changed, and if you all rise up, you can close those reactors down for sure. And I know that the governor, Cuomo, is in favour of doing just that.
A nuclear power plant is a heat engine with a lethal byproduct. And Dr. Caldicott, you speak of the routine release of radiation. Can you speak more about the effects of that radiation, not only on children and girls more than boys, but on the ecosphere, on the heating of the rivers and the waters, on the aquatic life, and how this insinuates itself into the body through the food chain?
When you put uranium in a nuclear power plant and you fission it, as you do with a nuclear bomb, except that this is a controlled fission, it won't explode except under extenuating circumstances, like kind of happened at Chernobyl. 200 new radioactive elements are made as the very large uranium atom splits apart in a random fashion. And some of those radioactive elements last only for seconds, or milliseconds, but some last for actually millions of years. So there's a whole spectrum of aging of isotopes from reactors. Now, all of those isotopes, or radioactive elements, are dangerous to the environment. And when there is a major release, like at Fukushima, for instance, which is far worse than Chernobyl, where 40% of the European landmass is still radioactive and will be for hundreds of years, as these elements land on the ground, coming down with fallout via the rain, they bioconcentrate in the food chain. For instance, let's take cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, and you multiply that by 10 or 20 to get its total radiological life. So say it lasts for 600 years. It lands on the ground. Now, it is a potassium analog. In other words, the biological cycles think that it's potassium, and our body is rich in potassium, and plants are too, particularly bananas. And so it is taken up by the roots of the grass and the vegetables and the plants and concentrated in the plants by orders of magnitude, 10, 20, 100 times. Then along come the cows, and they eat the grass. And so the cesium is concentrated by orders of magnitude again in the cows, in the flesh, the meat, and also the milk. And then along we come, and we eat the flesh as a steak, or we drink the milk. And so the cesium is concentrated more in our bodies. And you can imagine a woman breastfeeding, and the cesium would go through her breast, concentrating in the milk, and as it goes through the breast, the radiation from the cesium can mutate genes in the breast cells, genes which control the rate of cell division, called regulatory genes. The baby drinks the milk, and so the cesium is concentrated further in the baby's flesh, muscles, brain, you name it. Babies are extraordinarily sensitive to radiation, and fetuses are thousands of times more sensitive than adults. One X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in that baby or child. Anyway, so say you're a woman and you've been irradiated by some cesium passing through your lactating breast, then if the cell that has had the mutation in its regulatory gene, it just sits there dormant for any time from 5 to 60 years, and that is called the latent period of carcinogenesis, or the incubation time for cancer. Now, if I sneeze on you, within 2 days you're sneezing, because the incubation time for cold is 2 days. For measles, mumps, chickenpox, it's 3 weeks. For cancer, it's 5 to 70 years. And one day that cell starts dividing not in the regulated fashion, but it becomes irregular and produces not 2 cells, but millions and billions of cells. And that's what a cancer is. It's unregulated cell growth. And we in medicine really don't know how to stop that unregulated cell growth. There are a few cancers we can sometimes cure, like childhood leukemia and cancer of the kidney in children, but most cancers are very difficult to cure. And so it only takes a single mutation in a single gene, in a single cell, to kill you. And it's very cryptogenic and silent. It's a silent killer, because you don't know that your cell has had a mutation. And when the cancer arises, it doesn't wear a little flag saying, I was made by some cesium-137 that passed through your lactating breast 30 years ago when you were feeding your baby. And so it's difficult to work out which cancers are caused by what.